Okay, hello everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for being here, for being the survivors, for being the warriors for our last event of the day. Last but not least, looking at Roma and the housing and energy agendas of the European Union. Thank you very much to those of you who are joining us in person and those who are joining us online. As you know, for those who maybe are only joining us for this event is part of a larger manifestation called the Roma Week, which is in progress from Monday till Thursday, so till tomorrow. Every April, maybe you know, maybe you don't, 8th of April is International Roma Day. And Ergo Network, the organization I work for, the European Roma Grassroots Organizations Network, together with the European institutions and other institutional partners and stakeholders, organize through the month of April a week of events dedicated to Roma rights in Europe, including this afternoon the right to housing. We would want to, of course, particularly acknowledge the European Economic and Social Committee, who is hosting us throughout today, including this afternoon, and then the partners of this specific event alongside Ergo Network, which is UN Habitat, and also FEANZA. Just very quickly, a bit of housekeeping before we begin, which is that in Ergo Network, we have a code of conduct that applies. So we hope that everybody feels safe and feels protected through the duration of our events. And in case there is anybody to flag, there is anybody who would like to flag up any inappropriate behavior, please feel free to do so by reaching out to my colleagues there at the back. But of course, we hope that that won't be the case and that everybody will feel comfortable and will feel safe throughout today. Please also note that photos and videos will be taken during this event and will be used for our communication. And as I mentioned, our event is also being live streamed. Without any further ado, I would like to begin this session today by welcoming with us member of the European Parliament, Maria Ohisalo from the Greens and also from Finland, who has been very keenly involved in the work that the European Parliament has been carrying out on housing, not least by being shadow rapporteur of the recently adopted European Parliament report on the housing crisis in the European Union. But more than that, Ms. Ohisalo has reached out very proactively to civil society, including Roma civil society, and has actively sought to integrate grassroots perspectives in this parliamentary work, which is why it is a double honor to have you with us today. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation and for staying this late. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Really appreciate it, dear organizers and dear participants, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to come here for this event as part of the really, really timely and important Roma Week and an opportunity to deliver these opening words. I would like to start by sharing words of a person from the Roma community, which jumped out of the one website while I was doing my homework before this speech. It read, "We can only get out of here if we die." I let it sink for a while, and then it was difficult to get it out of my mind. That is how profound exclusion feels, from housing, from jobs, from education, from public services. We can only get out of here if we die. For 600 years in Europe, Roma people have not only faced persecution, discrimination, prejudice, and human rights abuses, but they've been forgotten. Who knows about the Roma history, culture, way of life, or the arts of the Roma community, expressing their skills, talents, and self-accomplishment? Not enough people do so. And that is why this Roma Week is so important. I was impressed with the week's agenda. It reflects the challenges the Roma community continues to face, but also its multifaceted nature, addressing opportunities, future, fight for justice and equality, and young people and their empowerment. In this event of the week, you are here to talk about Roma in Europe's housing and energy agenda. Housing is not merely about walls and roofs, but about fairness and about a right to live in safety and in dignity. Only from the safety of a home can a person build their lives and realize their potential. Housing is a fundamental human right. This is my core message, always, everywhere. The challenges the Roma community faces in housing are staggering, confirmed by the data by the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights. Over 80% of Roma live in overcrowded conditions. Nearly half face housing deprivation, and 1 in 5 Roma households lives without access to running water or are affected by environmental pollution. Many continue to live in informal settlements and segregated neighborhoods. Discrimination remains a massive hurdle to many who are struggling to find a place to rent. The housing crisis, of course, touches people from all walks of life across Europe. It was therefore a high time that housing issues were brought to the EU agenda after the last EU elections. And for the first time, the Commission acknowledged what millions of Europeans have long known. Europe is facing a housing crisis, and this crisis requires a European response. As we've seen when it comes to COVID or when it comes to defense issues, we are saying that this is a European-wide crisis, then we find the tools to tackle the crisis. Housing should be seen similarly. Therefore, I think the Commission's Affordable Housing Plan, which was published in December and was eagerly awaited, with the hope that it would put forward tangible measures on housing that would start making a difference in the everyday lives of people. And of course, it did offer many. Thank you very much to Matthew Baldwin here. Boosting housing supply, mobilizing investment, driving reforms such as tackling speculation and challenges with short-term rentals, and supporting young people and preventing homelessness. However, you have all noticed that the Affordable Housing Plan has also its gaps. Words Roma, discrimination, segregation, for example, are mentioned in the report only once, each one of them. The ball has been kicked down the road. Now we wait if the forthcoming anti-poverty strategy, first ever in European history, will bring anything new to the table. We have, of course, pushed these to be an integral part of the strategy. The European Parliament did not succeed any better in its report on the European housing crisis and solutions to it, and I was really sad about it. I went to the negotiations and to the whole process like really open-minded and eagerly that we could find each other from the left to right, from conservatives to liberals, but it did not go like that. It really did fall short even from the Commission's plan, I have to say. I was the shadow in the Greens process, and I was hoping that this European Parliament would be able to draft a report that is not only ambitious, but also puts people at the heart of the whole narrative, whole report. In the end, this did not happen. The Parliament's report failed to confront speculation, financialisation of the housing market, and the unchecked expansion of short-term rentals. And it did not respond to some of our most pressing demands, such as recognizing housing as a human right, tackling discrimination in the housing sector, a dedicated housing fund, and binding conditionalities to ensure universal long-term access to affordable housing, and stronger investment on social housing. And it did not address discrimination, racism, or any minority-specific questions in a satisfactory way. European housing policies should have a very simple objective: to create Europe where no one is left homeless, where rents are fair, where young and old alike can live in safe, healthy homes. And energy policies are in the heart of that package too. We as Greens support the focus on renovating existing buildings before constructing new ones, on energy efficiency, and on enabling households and communities to benefit from the energy transition and have their homes powered by renewable energy. This is essential if housing is to be affordable, decent and sustainable all at the same time, and this is possible to be done. The housing crisis is not a natural disaster. It is the result of political choices, decades of policies that have treated homes as financial assets rather than places to live. And indeed, inequality, poverty and discrimination are also a result of policy choices. But we know what to do in order to turn the tide. And for starters, we cannot exclude people in most need from our housing policies. They have been excluded enough. Those who need the most support must get it. And I really wish that we unite our forces in these questions and that we would not have to have the same discussions about equality and so forth. I was actually surprised that I had to have these discussions in the parliament negotiations, but I'm continuing the work and I want to thank you all for doing the work, and I wish you a fruitful discussion today and frank exchange of sustainable solutions to the challenges Roma are facing in the housing sector. So dear participants and friends, onwards and upwards. Thank you very much.
Apologies, I was conveying privately our thanks to MEP Ohisalo for having taken the time to be with us today. Unfortunately, she cannot stay any longer, but thank you once again, and we keep in touch. And it's always good to know that we have allies also inside the institutions who are pushing for this very important agenda, because we want people to get out way before they die. Let us revert now to our other opening speaker, who unfortunately could not join us in person and who unfortunately could not join us also via video link, which was the original plan, but she nonetheless is with us in spirit as well as in video message. Anna Claudia Rosbach, who is the Executive Director of UN Habitat, who should have gone first, but to respect MEP Ohisalo's timing constraints, we have begun with her intervention. So we have a video message from the Executive Director of UN Habitat, which I invite you to follow now, please. Thank you.
Colleagues, partners, and friends, it's an honor to join you at this moment as we come together to address a pressing and persistent challenge in Europe: the right to adequate housing for Roma communities. The world is facing a global housing crisis, and nearly 3 billion people lack adequate housing. More than 1 billion people live in informal settlements and slums. Over 300 million people experience homelessness. At UN Habitat, we are guided by a simple but fundamental principle: housing is a human right and a foundation for dignity, safety, and opportunity. This principle is grounded in the right to an adequate standard of living. But adequate housing is not just a roof over one's head. It means security of tenure, affordability, accessibility, access to basic services such as water, sanitation, and energy, safe and livable conditions, proximity to opportunities, and respect for cultural identity. When any of these elements are missing, the right to housing is not fulfilled. Today, for many Roma communities across Europe, this right remains out of reach. Roma communities continue to face systemic discrimination, spatial segregation, and deep-rooted exclusion in access to housing. Too many families live in segregated settlements, cut off from essential services, employment, healthcare, and education. Many experience insecure tenure and risk eviction, and housing conditions that are overcrowded or lack basic infrastructure. This is not only a housing issue. These are structural imbalances embedded in policies, planning systems, and social attitudes that are driving inequality, reinforcing poverty, limiting opportunity, and perpetuating marginalization of Roma across generations. UN Habitat is clear. We cannot address housing without addressing discrimination, and we cannot address inequality without tackling spatial segregation. The situation of Roma communities in Europe reflects broader global patterns. Spatial segregation has become a defining feature of urbanization, concentrating disadvantage and limiting social mobility. It acts as a poverty trap, as where people live determines their access to opportunities. Addressing these challenges requires systemic responses. The new urban agenda calls on us to leave no one behind by promoting inclusive, integrated, and accessible cities, explicitly addressing segregation and unequal access to housing and services. With political will, the right to adequate housing can be a powerful entry point to tackling discrimination. By applying all dimensions of adequate housing, Roma communities can live safely, free from threats of eviction, with access to services and better connections to jobs, education, and healthcare. It also requires joined-up action from national and local governments, Roma communities, civil society, and residents working together. It also requires a willingness to challenge attitudes, change behaviors, and build trust. Global experience shows that inclusive cities do not happen by chance. They are actively planned, financed, and governed, and sustained through effective institutional frameworks. UN Habitat brings extensive technical experience that can support this work, including participatory upgrading, land tenure regularization, and inclusive urban regeneration. We stand ready to support governments and partners in making the bold and necessary decisions required. The United Nations remains firmly committed to fighting discrimination in all its forms. Together, we must ensure that adequate housing for Roma communities is not the exception, but the norm. Thank you.
More powerful words, and once again the assessment that has that has followed us since this morning, which is the role of anti-gypsyism, the powerful role that anti-gypsyism plays every day in denying Roma communities their rights, whether we talk about young people, online spaces, transitional justice, or whether we talk about housing and energy like we do today. So the one imperative to keep in mind is that discrimination is real and discrimination kills. And any policy that wants to achieve a difference should start from there. With these wise words from MEP Ohisalo and from the Executive Director Rosbach, we are now beginning our deeper foray, let's say, into the situation of Roma housing on the ground. What is happening? What are the promises? What are the realities? What is the funding? And what is the action? So I would like to invite the members of our first panel to join us here. First of all, from UN Habitat, Defet, please, and Florin from Botonogu, from the Policy Center for Roma and Minorities, but also Mr. Matthew Baldwin from the European Commission, Daniela Mormile from the other arm of the European Commission, and Daniela Aydin from the Council of Europe Development Bank. This is just, you have some Roma Week merch on your chairs. Yes, please.
Thanks for the merch.
The reason I have split the sitting strategically between the side who is going to speak more about ground realities and yourselves, whom we're counting on for the policy level perspective and the broader institutional and funding perspective. And first of all, thank you very much to everybody for joining us today. I think this is a stellar panel and I'm absolutely honored to moderate it. Without further ado, David, we will start with you. So, head of office of the European Union, head of the European Union office, more to the point, of UN Habitat, And you also have a PowerPoint presentation which we will be showing. And you will be sharing some findings from your most recent work regarding the situation of Roma housing on the ground in the European Union, but also beyond in the Western Balkans. So without further ado, please go ahead. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Amana. Thank you very much, Ergo Network and the European Commission and everybody. Yes. First, thank you very much, Amana, and Ergo Network and partners within the European Commission and Fianza and other partners for organizing this and inviting us to share our thoughts, our findings on the issue of Roma, and to really talk about housing as an entry point for Roma inclusion. Do we have a button thing?
You can say slides.
Oh, okay, great. Maybe click the whole slide. So we'll talk a little bit about contextualizing the Roma exclusion, Habitat's approach, which we heard a little bit from our executive director earlier, a short case study, and towards an inclusive settlements approach and what that might look like. Since I'm talking after our executive director, she really wanted to be here. Today is our executive board, so it wasn't possible. She has to be there with member states in Nairobi. But despite this, she said, no, I'll find a way to be there in person, you know, and to be there remotely, even though we have all of our board members and everybody in Nairobi. She really tried, and anyway, eventually we had the video backup in place, and eventually she had to say, look, it's not going to happen. But she really wants to be here. So very genuinely, her heart really is in this work. And she'll be here in June, and hopefully there'll be an opportunity to meet again. But this work is super important. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, so let's talk about some of the data that we know. That's the next slide. So as we know from the Fundamental Rights Agency, 80% of Roma people are at risk of poverty. In the settlements that they're living in, 33% don't have an indoor toilet. 1 in 5 are lacking access to running water. 80% are living in overcrowded households. Unemployment rate is extremely high, and last one, and 25% of Roma have faced eviction and discrimination, housing-related discrimination in the last 5 years. Even as they try to access social housing and other things, they are discriminated against. Next slide. But you know, we can just see this example. Actually, this is outside the European Union, I think, in Serbia. But this is the conditions that many Roma people are living in, and it's appalling. We shouldn't be tolerating such living conditions in this day and age, and we really have to start addressing this. If we go to the next slide. Our approach then to housing as a human right, as the executive director mentioned, is grounded on the right to adequate housing, which is established really from 1948 in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that places housing within a right to an adequate standard of living, but more specifically in General Comment 1991 on the right of adequate housing, which was adopted by the UN Committee on Economic and Social Rights, which is i.e. 193 countries. So housing is a human right, but we ought to bring this on top of many other legislations that already exist, for instance, the EU Anti-Racism Action Plan, the EU Charter on Fundamental Rights, the European Convention on Human Rights, as well as in the neighbouring region, the Western Balkans Roma Declaration, and other things. So really the global sort of legislation behind addressing the issue of Roma settlements and is there. We want to complement this with the idea of housing as a human right. So when we break this down, as our executive director mentioned, it's more than a roof over your head. It's the legal tenure, security of tenure. This doesn't just protect you from forced eviction and arbitrary displacement, it gives you an address. Well, when you have an address, you can have access to schools, you can apply for things, you can have access to basic services such as water, sanitation, and other measures. You can you can access health, you can access so many, you can apply for a job. There are so many things you can do just by having an address that's yours. And so tenure security is absolutely critical. And then when you've got tenure security, you can start improving your house. So many houses are in the situation that we saw in the previous slide, because if you think you're going to be evicted, you're not going to invest in your house. So tenure security is absolutely fundamental. And when we talk about housing, people think, oh no, that sounds really expensive. You know, let's not, good idea, but perhaps not. We don't have the budget for it. But tenure security doesn't cost, it costs very little to secure tenure security. If we zoom over to a completely different continent, Rwanda introduced a tenure program, social domain tenure, and it costs $7 per plot, and they implemented over 10 million plots in 4 years. So tenure security is something that can be done very quickly, but with political will and with minimum cost. It's a no-brainer, but political will is key. Affordability. The housing that we live in must be affordable. And there are many ways, different ways to measure affordability, but basically your housing costs shouldn't threaten your ability to pay for your other basic needs. Habitability is key, that the house protects from cold, damp, heat, rain, wind, but this also has a link to health, that you live in a more healthy environment if your house is secure. The housing needs to be linked to services, and once you have tenure security, once you have an address, you have the right to have equitable levels of services like water, energy, waste disposal as anybody else in the city. Accessibility. It's key that housing is accessible to everyone, particularly vulnerable groups, particularly people who live with disabilities, and are located somewhere where there's proximity to sources of employment, healthcare, schools, and social services. And also the seventh is cultural adequacy, respecting and enabling expression of cultural identity. So when we talk about housing, it's more than that roof over your head. It gives you access. And go to the next slide. And the next one again then. So we see housing as an entry point to desegregation. As mentioned, housing with secure tenure is a catalyst for inclusion, and it doesn't cost a huge amount. It's absolutely fundamental. But we have to look at the community level as well. Socially and culturally integrated communities. It's one thing to have a settlement, a Roma settlement that is upgraded, that has tenure security, but then it also needs to be integrated with the urban fabric, you know, so that you don't, in the process of even upgrading, you don't entrench that sort of isolation or segregation. So we need to see how we can look at the settlements from a point of community and social integration and cohesion. And then we need to ensure that desegregation is safeguarded through design. So we advocate for mixed use development, so that housing is linked to other types of land uses that could generate employment, that can generate sort of leisure opportunities, education, and other things, so that there's a proximity to the provisions of the city. But also mixed income is important, so that you don't have children who are, you know, so we're linking different sectors of society. Children are going to school in a diverse environment where there's all different types of people there, and they get to know each other. So desegregation needs to be part of the urban design. Next slide, please. And there are different types of approaches. I've talked a bit about settlement upgrading. urban redevelopment, and we're seeing that many of the Roma settlements are actually on the edges of cities, and as cities expand, there's a need to actually look at, okay, how are we going to deal with this settlement that's on the periphery on our city as the city expands? And that in itself gives an entry point. I remember working, for instance, in Iraq, where the governor had just, of Erbil, had just built a new airport. And the first thing he said is, can you help us get rid of this informal settlement? Because I don't like the fact we have to drive through it on the way to the city. So he wasn't talking about slum dwellers and the fact that they don't have much water or anything. He just wanted the city to be fixed. And I said, well, we don't do removal of slums. We do upgrading of them. And I encouraged him then to go into the community. And first of all, he was very happy because he had met the men. And I said, okay, now you meet the young people. And he did that. And then he met the women. He actually put houses for his women staff in the community and did this very thorough participatory process. And we managed to get tenure security for 20,000 people in one, and this took 3 or 4 years, but it cost us about $1 million in a very thorough process and introducing legislation, special planning zones and other things, but it was not expensive. I was worrying about how these people are going to fix their houses and where are they going to get the housing finance for. But once they had tenure security, they improved it themselves. So the governor was happy, the city looks better, but the people were even happier. So the upgrading, urban redevelopment is key. And urban redevelopment gives us an opportunity to integrate housing with other functions and even create some cross subsidies in that process with more investment with certain types of building uses that attracts investments, maybe cross-subsidizing some of the housing-related costs and for people that need them, social housing, for instance. And then sometimes there's a need for relocation. So, and when we do that, it's important that it's participatory and it's inclusive. And at the heart of all of this is building trust. So cities can do a lot, and we have to localize. We can't just talk about national policies, national approaches. It has to be localized. But the key is there needs to be trust. There needs to be trust that the city is going to deliver on your rights. And often the interlocutors are the NGOs, local NGOs working between the Roma communities and the local government. Next slide. Just an example, in Romania, Rasița, this is actually a relocation project, and some of you might be aware of it already. But in this one, I'm just looking at my notes, sorry. This is, here are about 157 families living in a building that was about to collapse. And so the approach there was to move them in full participation to different parts of the city. So they then went into social housing, some were supported to buy housing, but linked to the program then was all sorts of other functions, such as training of young people to be able to get jobs, training to small enterprises to generate businesses, and various sort of social functions, so that it's not just housing on its own, but what you're doing is rebuilding lives. As people move, you need to prepare them for a new way of living and for the integration. So it has to have a strong sort of social function alongside a technical function. So this was what made it work then is not just relocation, but an integrated action, a gradual dispersal across the city, a mix of housing solutions, and at the same time support for debt resolution, employment pathways, social enterprises, and it was embedded in a process of continuous dialogue. Now, we need to cover, okay, fine. So as we move forward, what we're finding useful is not to move from isolated successful projects to city development approaches. We can go to the next slide if you want. we need to move from isolated projects to city development programs, because what this helps you to do, sometimes what we find is everything is too much with the mayor. Occasionally you get a mayor that wants to do something about the Roma communities. Often the mayor doesn't want to touch it, and it's so difficult. But when you look at a citywide development strategy, it gives you other narratives as well. It gives narratives around let's fix our city, let's have a socially inclusive, let's have a economically thriving city, and with that, with access to public space, with access to employment and other things. And as we generate city development strategies, then we include in them the inclusive Roma settlements programs, either through relocation if needed, but preferably through upgrading or redevelopment. There are several strategies that can be used. If we go to the next slide, maybe I'll stop there. Next slide, sorry, next after this. The core enablers for this is planning. We need to look at planning at all different levels. We need multi-level governance frameworks as well, where you have the national authorities working with the regional, working with the local authorities, working with communities. And we need finance. And quite often with finance, even things like land value can be leveraged, existing buildings can be leveraged. A lot of things like cross-subsidies can happen to take the challenge off the balance sheet of the local authority or the government. We can link it with private sector sources. We can link it with IFIs. If we just go to the last slide, we'll just keep going. What we are advocating for now is a platform, because we need so much joining up. We need national authorities to work with local authorities that work with communities. We need to have the finances working. We need the IFIs to be working with the private sector. We need to be working with households. We need conducive policy environments, and we need access to best practices and good ideas. And so often, if one component of that ecosystem is missing, then a good idea doesn't get done. So what we would really like to do is to have some kind of platform that brings together good legislations, good policies, good best practices, enables local authorities to learn from other local authorities, to have communities learn from other communities, so that we can scale up. And I think the key thing now is scaling up. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for such a comprehensive overview, first of all, of your work, but also of the things that are needed. And a couple of things that I wrote down and which are ever so important are the link, once again, the link with anti-racism, but also the fact that a house is so much more than just a roof, and a house is not a home unless it becomes that. But also the importance of trust and of working together. And we all know that there is a trust deficit between Roma communities and housing providers, and we know why that mistrust is there, and how it's going to take a lot of work to rebuild these working pathways. Switching it up a little bit in order to keep the agenda dynamic and to make sure that nobody gets too complacent, I am now going to turn not to my left but to my right to Matthew Baldwin, who is the head of the Housing Task Force in DG Energy and Housing of the European Commission. Thank you very much for being with here today. Exciting times. The EU has just proposed the Affordable Housing Plan, which will become an Affordable Housing Act. Moreover, in just a couple of weeks, on the 6th of May, we hope to also see some more action on housing exclusion. You've heard a little bit what are the challenges. Can I turn to you with a delicate task of what can we do about it together to tackle some of these issues? Thank you once again very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here and to bring all of our attention to this crucial issue, and it's really an honor to be here. I want to associate myself with everything that's already been said. To be brief, I fully agree. Our entire approach is based exactly on the notion that housing is not a commodity. It is a right. It is, I think if you put it very well in your materials, it's a cornerstone of social cohesion, human dignity and equality. And I therefore agree with Maria, I agree with Anna Claudia, I agree with David. Me too, as they used to say, but they don't say anymore. It's interesting, I think, that the rest of Europe has caught up with the battle of the Roma community. For you, the issue of housing exclusion and housing as a nightmare, as the great slides and pictures of David have shown, is not a new thing for you and this community. And maybe the rest of us in Europe just caught up. And it's quite interesting to say why, because it'll help you align and leverage with our own efforts. Everyone's using a similar quote, and I want to quote from President von der Leyen. A home is not just four walls and a roof. It is, or it ought to be, I add, safety, warmth, a place for family and friends. It is belonging. But for too many Europeans, home has become a source of anxiety. It can mean debt or uncertainty. That, of course, is the daily, generational reality for the Roma people. And therefore, as I say, the rest of us are catching up. This issue has zoomed up the political agenda. Maria very, very wisely described, Maria Ohisolo wisely described the work of the House Committee, a new committee just on housing in the European Parliament. We now have a commissioner for the first time responsible for housing, and I have the honour to lead the task force which is trying to coordinate the different efforts across the European Commission. And thank you for your nice remarks about our plan, which came forward in December. I do understand and take the point and the criticisms of those such as Maria, and I haven't thanked or welcomed the co-sponsors of this event, including our good friends in Fianza. You have been kind enough to say it has some good elements to take forward. You, of course, want more. I totally understand that. But it is a start to this consideration at the European level. We are not trying to step in at the European Commission and say, listen up, we have all the solutions, what I call the long wagging finger of the European Commission. This remains the first and foremost the responsibility of member states and cities and housing. And what this plan represents is an attempt to support those efforts for the first time at the European level. I would put it that the plan carves out a space at the European level to precisely do that and add value. And I like what you said, David, about developing an environment, an enabling environment, a platform for further work to continue. And if I may also say, I think you're absolutely right to identify security of tenure as a key issue. I don't know how much more time I'll have, so I'll be very, very quick. Lying behind the principle of housing first, all the work to try to address, to bring homelessness to the core of our attention. Just quickly on the broader picture, because again, just so you can see how to slot in your efforts with those of the broader picture. When we ask citizens, what is the most pressing issue for you? And we asked them in cities, and we asked them in towns and suburbs, and we asked them in rural areas. And housing, or lack of affordable housing, came out number one issue, big time, in the cities. To a great extent, it was the largest issue in towns and suburbs, and even in rural areas, it was a close third. So this issue is shared across the political agenda in Europe. It also means, therefore, that when we talk about housing, when we come forward with our plan, we had to shoot wide, we had to shoot large. And again, Maria was kind enough to talk about some of those areas. We need to focus on efforts to boost housing supply. The construction industry has had the slowest productivity growth of any sector in Europe. We need to think about ways in which our European legislation, as well as national and local legislation, may be impeding efforts to provide social and affordable housing. So we need to look at those efforts as well, whilst absolutely underlining we need to keep hold of our social and our environmental commitments. We need to mobilize more investment. Again, for this, we're setting up the Pan-European Investment Platform, which I hope will bring forward really innovative but practical ways to leverage the limited public money that's available. I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen, that is the reality. There is limited money available to drive responsible, patient, private capital to support that. And we've loosened the state aid rules to make it easier for member states to support affordable housing. In the context of you mentioned the Affordable Housing Act. That's where we're going to try to address some of the issues which are really pressing down on our cities, short-term rentals. Cities are itching to take other steps to tackle acquisition and use, such as second homes, such as vacant buildings, and we need to try to give them more legal certainty, some more space in which to do so, whilst at the same time encouraging them also to take supply seriously. That'll be the focus on the Affordable Housing Act, which we hope will be coming out in the coming months. And last but not least, housing has now made it to the top table of the European semester. And this is a very welcome event. It's been a hell of a lot of work bringing it to the top table. But I'm pleased also that when I look at the 27 housing annexes that we've developed, we're now covering Roma housing issues in many of the reports in many countries. I hope that this will be, and this of course is a negotiated effort, first inside the Commission and then with the Member States, the issues of relating to country-specific recommendations, really looking at this and trying to get after it. And this is important not just because we all love the European semester, it's important because people say, and I think they're right, the next multi-annual financial framework, the next MFF, will very much be based on the orientations that flow from this. And of course, it's being negotiated in parallel. If you've got issues relating to a particular country, if you think there's data that we're missing, please get in touch with us. I'll give you the contact details at the end. Get in touch with our country desks. You mentioned the anti-poverty strategy. A quick word on that. On the 6th of May, it was foreshadowed in the plan. We will be coming forward with the first ever, there's a lot of first evers in this brief speech, anti-poverty strategy, which will come forward with council recommendations on the whole issue of housing exclusion. Now, of course, Roma needs to be a big part of that. It needs to be addressed at the national level. It needs to be followed up and monitored and driven forward. Please watch this space. We're watching carefully to see that EU funds don't contribute to further discrimination and segregation. We're very much in line with the guidance on non-segregation that DG Regio have brought out. And we're also trying to ensure that we are driving the necessary infrastructure. Underlying a lot of what David had to say is it's not just about the house itself, it's the necessary backup. It's the sanitation, it's measures to combat spatial segregation, it's preventing forced evictions. It's providing essential services of health and education and just shops. I cycled at the weekend through the camp near Dunkirk, and most of these guys are having to walk 4 or 5 kilometers just to buy bread. And so when I know this is not a typical situation, it's another ghastly situation, but we need to think about how we provide basic commercial services for people across the board. So all of this has been tackled in the Council recommendation on Roma equality, inclusion and participation of 2021, and I'm sure that Danielle is going to touch briefly on this as well. I am racing through my plan, but I just want to stress that 2 of our 10 pillars relate to protecting the most affected, housing for young people, of which, of course, many Roma people, and addressing homelessness, supporting households and tenants in vulnerable situations. I do want to read to you briefly from the plan, if I can find it, because Maria was critical, but he only mentioned the Roma situation once, but quite powerfully, if I may say. We stressed that low-income groups are particularly impacted by the housing crisis, groups in situation of a disadvantage, including, of course, Roma and other marginalised minorities, and other groups at risk of exclusion and discrimination, who face specific challenges in accessing housing, as well as the people with disabilities. And we are focusing in a big way on this in the plan under our Pillar 4, supporting the most affected. We will be running this through a thing we call the Housing Alliance. And that will be the place where you can make your views known about what needs to be done to bring, not just supporting or improving the proposals we come forward with, but telling us what should be the priorities. And so this is the start of a process at the European level. It's the start, I hope, of an exciting journey. We're standing on the shoulders of giants in UN Habitat who've done so much of the work before us. And I really pay tribute to everyone who's fought so hard and so long for Roma inclusion on the housing agenda and so many other agendas. I am very sorry, but my diary is coming down around my ears, and I'm going to have to do that very rude thing of speaking and running. But thank you very much indeed for your attention and for inviting me here today.
Thank you. First of all, a round of applause for Mr. Baldwin. Thank you very much. Please take your merch.
I will, very nice.
to remember us by, and we'll definitely be in touch. We'll come knocking on your door, especially since you encouraged us to do so.
I did. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. Ciao.
Very, very important words also about the teeth that these new initiatives might have to bite, which is through their integration in the European semester. We're, of course, looking forward to the 3rd of June. And the spring package, some of us do live our lives around the European semester, even if this doesn't say much about our private lives. But on the 3rd of June, the spring package is coming out where the country reports will contain for every country an annex dedicated to the housing situation. This is new. This is very important. We also hope that these will underpin country-specific recommendations, which are one of the, if not the strongest instrument that we have when it comes to EU social policy. And given that it's a shared competence between member states and the European Union, so those country-specific recommendations are really important. Jumping now back to realities, I'm turning now to my left to Florin Botonogu, who is the director of the Policy Center for Roma and Minorities in Romania, member of Ergo Network, who is going to briefly present. Thank you. Sorry. Florin, I don't know why I was sabotaged when I was introducing you. But once again, Florin Botonogu, Director of the Policy Center for Roma and Minorities and a member of Ergo Network, who is going to share about the work that Ergo Network has been doing, first of all, to capture Roma realities in terms of housing at the grassroots level, and then our interpretation of the housing plan, which was just presented here by Maria Ohisalo, but also by Matthew Baldwin. So we know what's in the plan, but do we think it's enough? And if not, what is missing? Florin.
Thank you very much. One of the reasons that I'm enthusiastic about the topic of housing is that it's very complex. A lot of vectors, a lot of responsibility, of a lot of problems. So what I'm trying to do now is hopefully make a very, very simple presentation about this kind of issue. So first of all, Ergo, it's an umbrella organization. The next slide, please. It's an umbrella organization, 26 European countries, 32 grassroots organizations representing Roma, founded in 2008. And the main line of activities is, of course, dealing with poverty, inequality, antigypsyism, and other issues that Roma are facing in the community. And the second one is strengthen the Roma civil society. Next one, please. Okay. So every year we have a thematic focus. And 2023 was a good year for housing thematic report. We did research in 6 countries, Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Hungary, Romania, Slovakia, Spain, and prepared national case studies. The value added is that we added information from Albania, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Kosovo, Macedonia, Turkey, and Ireland. And that is very useful. I encourage you all to go online and to look at the report, which I'm going to summarize in the next few slides. So, key messages. The first key message is that there is a huge gap between the living conditions of Roma and the living condition not of other non-Roma, but of the neighbors. And this is the methodology that Fundamental Rights Agency has been using for years to measure this gap. Yeah? Of course, there are inside the countries, there are gaps of development. But when you have the same city, the same locality, the same community even, where you have the huge gap between Roma and non-Roma, then you should look at structural issues, not only housing issues. Of course, Europe has now a crisis of housing and is recognized, and is dealt with. But Roma have been having this crisis for, I don't know, 20, 30 years. So it's not that necessarily Europe has catch up with this housing crisis, because the housing crisis in the case of Roma is a bit different. And we are talking about discrimination, we are talking about actually point number 2, we are talking about segregated communities, yeah, informal settlements, and exposure to environmental hazards. The key word here is clear targets, yeah? It's clear that we have historical problems and we have clear targets. But this we have only recently, yeah? For example, in Romania, Romania has clear targets in terms of legalizing informal settlements, yeah, by using EU funds. And it's very good. People are optimistic in Romania, but let's see in the end how much of these targets are achieved and why and what can we do better. High cost of housing and over complex administrative procedures. The keyword here would be better regulation of the housing and utilities market, because this leads systematically to lack of accessibility, basically to exclusion. Yeah, when you have this kind of prohibited prices at utilities, you may offer social housing, yeah, but utilities are still the responsibility of the poor people. So how are they going to cover it? That's still a discussion. Next slide, please. The Roma continue to face anti-gypsyism and forced evictions. That's another important issue. The keyword here is training, but not only anti-bias training. Of course, this should be the basis, yeah? Because those, in many cases, those who are supposed to solve the problems of the Roma, urbanists, architects, social workers, it's not very often that they are the ones who are creating actually the problems. They are the ones who are neglecting Roma communities. They are the ones who do not want to look at the living conditions of the Roma communities. So we need training to explain. From my personal experience, we have a legislation dealing with informal settlements. Yeah, I went in the field to implement this kind of legislation. I had numerous discussions with numerous mayors, trying to convince them that they really have an informal communities in their locality. Yeah, they are aware that there is a Roma community, there is a Gypsy community, there are some people there, but they do not belong to our cities, to the next village, but yeah, but no. So it took me a lot of time to convince, yeah, it doesn't appear in your urbanistic plans, but it is physically there. You should really address these kind of issues. Social housing holds great potential for Roma housing, but is currently underutilized. Yeah. Here we should say that there is a will, and there is a will from the European Union, because they allow using the funds for housing. Yeah. There is a will from the national governments even, because, for example, in Romania, those who are aware of the community-led local development mechanism, you have development strategies for communities, for the local communities, and in Romania we have 42 projects in this kind of mechanisms, and out of 42 projects, 32 are dealing with building of housing. So basically, you can see that sometimes there is a willing to do this. What is actually lacking here is political will. Because in many, many cities, although you have money, you don't have political will to implement it. And the last point, Roma communities and their civil society organization must be involved to co-create sustainable ways forward. And here the key word would be evidence-based solutions. Yeah, because we have countless discussions in the ministries at the EU level, but we really need to involve Roma, we really need to use the data from the local level because solutions should be different according to this kind of data. And also desegregated data collection. I had a lot of discussion going to the ministry and saying, what did you do for Roma housing? And they are saying, well, we do a lot of social housing, but we cannot say how many houses we build for Roma because we don't collect this kind of data because it's not politically correct. So this ends all the discussion basically on this topic. Okay, the EU Affordable Housing Plan, the next slide. There are many, many good things that we can see in the Affordable Housing Plan. We welcome that Europe faces a structural recognition of the structural crisis, acknowledgement of Roma as a group disproportionately affected, it focuses on affordability, so on, so on. So what is missing? Here you have the points that, in our opinion, are missing. But summarizing, I believe it's two main issues. This plan is not bold enough, is not courageous enough. Yeah? As Mr. Baldwin said, it is a beginning, but it's a very shy beginning. Yeah? So I believe that's why we are here to give a push to this kind of plan and to see it happening. Yeah? And the second main criticism is that the plan does not address the root causes of the housing crisis in Roma communities. And we refer to antigypsyism, discrimination, segregation, informal settlement, discrimination, everything. And there is no clear safeguard to ensure EU funds do not reinforce segregation. And here, I'd like to give you two examples, very recent examples. Yesterday, I participated to a high-level meeting between Romanian and Bulgarian Ministry of Development on the topic of informal settlements. And the Bulgarian Minister of Regional Development said the following thing. We have the legislation and we have the funds. Yeah, which is true. I mean, my personal opinion is that we have more funds that we are capable to implement at this moment. Yeah? And he continued, but something is missing. And I was like, okay, I'm working for years in the civil society, I know the situation in the field, and I know something is missing. I often get this feeling. But this guy in front of me, he's a minister, yeah? Roma are not his priority, but he also noticed that we have legislation, we have funds, but something is missing. What is missing? So probably we are going to discuss this if we have the time. What is missing? Yeah? Probably the link with the local level. Yeah? How these wonderful plans, policies, and funds are really being implemented at the local level. And here I come to my second example. The last days I read a report in 6 countries referring to Justice Transition Fund. It is an evaluation, yeah? And out of these 6 countries in the region, Romania, Bulgaria, and so on, it was only one country that used 2% of these funds for social issues, not referring to Roma, but for social in general. So I asked around what happened in Romania, because Romania did not address social issues in this fund. And the answer was like local authorities, county authorities were not at all interested in what is called social. Yeah, so we have funds for transition, but they are not interested in social. So we are coming to the last slide. 2 minutes, one more slide with policy recommendations. Here we have them. But these recommendations, which you can read again, I'm sure you agree with these recommendations. I'm sure European Union, UN Habitat agrees with all of this, yeah? It's mostly how we implement them at the local level that we are missing. Yeah, how we are going to talk to the mayors and explain them whatever decision we have here or whatever plans we are implementing. And in the end, the next slide, it's a very nice sentence. Europe can be neither competitive, nor just, nor inclusive, nor sustainable, while millions of Roma remain locked out of decent housing and essential services such as energy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Florin, for this comprehensive analysis of the European Affordable Housing Plan, a pioneering initiative, and of course we are very happy to have it there, but we cannot help ourselves but notice some of the shortcomings of this plan in what concerns specifically Roma access to housing. I'm sure it does a brilliant job for a number of other groups, but we are concerned here with one specific group, and while there is one mention in the Affordable Housing Plan of Roma housing, it is amply insufficient given the situation of the ground that you all know. If you want to read more about Ergo Network's report, from Ergo Network's report on Roma access to housing, or about our analysis of the Affordable Housing Plan, there is a QR code stuck to the door that you can scan on your way out. Turning now again to my right, where I have two Danielas, last but not least, who will come with a complementary perspective to what we have heard so far. I will start with Daniela Mormilev, who is joining us from the other side of the European Commission. So we had the Housing Unit, and now we have the Roma Inclusion and Anti-Discrimination Unit, who, as you know, also oversees the implementation of the EU Roma Strategic Framework, the Council recommendation, and the national Roma frameworks on the ground. And as you also know, access to housing is one of the key objectives of these frameworks, including very key aspects for Roma housing inclusion, such as informal settlements, segregation, forced evictions, etc. So I'm going to turn to Daniela, who is going to give us just a flavor of what the unit is doing, and also what member states are doing specifically in the area of access to housing, as well as basic services such as energy. Daniela Mormile, thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thank you. Work?
Yes, and this is off, and now you're on. Yes.
I'm on, okay. Thank you very much, and thank you, Ergo, for this event, to which we participate as DG Just is D2, the Unit 2 is dealing with non-discrimination and coordination of Roma. So as Amana said, we are dealing with the EU Roma Strategic Framework, which is a document that most of you know, but I will explain in just a moment. And my presentation today, next slides, will be about presenting you a little bit the state of play, because of the access to housing for Roma in the implementation of this framework, and say something about other initiatives that were already presented by Mr. Baldwin before, and then that are embedding also the housing access of Roma to housing. Next slides. So I will skip this one because, I mean, it has been stressed several times that housing is a fundamental right, and there are the main issues for Roma and access to housing are related to the housing condition, overcrowding, the segregation, spatial segregation, and the phenomenon of forced eviction. Next slides. So somebody said, yes, we have rules, we have policy, and indeed we have established an EU policy framework for Roma that includes also an housing component. Next slides. So in this framework we have legislations that was mentioned also before. There is this Council recommendation on Roma equality, inclusion and participation of 2021. Is our, let's say, the legal basis, the main one that has a part dedicated to housing and calls on member states to prevent and combat residential segregation and by adopting measures to be developed at local level in consultation with Roma communities. We also have a resolution from the European Parliament of 2022 that it's focused on the situation of Roma living in settlements and that urge member states to eradicate segregated settlement by 2030. So we are in 2026 and well, not much has been done. And then more recently there were the Council conclusion under the Spanish presidency in 2023 that stressed once again the importance, the need to tackle the segregation in housing as is the main cause of unequal access to other services, in basic services like healthcare, education and employment. Next slide, please. Apart from the legislation, we have our strategic framework that runs for 10 years, 2020-2030, and which fixes clear objectives to be reached by 2030. And for housing, we have these three that you can see there on the left of the screen, which are to reduce the gap in housing deprivation by at least 1/3, then cut gap in overcrowding but at least half, and to ensure that at least 95% of Roma have access to tap water. Next slide, please. That's the framework. That's what the framework say. What is done concretely? I mean, to fulfill this objective in the member states. Now we are in the middle of the implementation of the strategic framework. What we can spot, I mean, as a key findings, let's say that there are persistent housing inequalities, which can be measured with these two figures that comes from the FRA surveys 2025, and they say that 47% of Roma are still living in a situation of housing deprivation, and 83%, somebody else already said it this afternoon, are living in overcrowding conditions. Segregation remains endemic especially in Central and Eastern European countries, but also in Western countries. In countries like Romania, we reach, I think, figures like percentages like 60%, which are quite high of the population, but also in Slovakia. Informal housing, this is another issue that we continue still to see in the member states. Informal housing is not about temporary housing, I mean, but it's really this concept of legally invisible informal housing. So it's defined as when there is no legal title, there are unregistered structure or settlement outside zoning plans. Well, and also this brings to legal insecurity, because it's like without a legal address, I think some speaker before mentioned, you don't have really, you face a kind of cascade exclusion from all other type of services, so employment, education, access to schools, and so on. and forced eviction that are quite sometimes a consequence of this informal settlement status, because without relocation, in some countries still we have, in many countries we have, for example, in Italy, France, Czech Republic, we saw that this forced eviction without relocation are kind of a pattern. So if there is not a provision for an alternative housing, what's happened? That there is a kind of vicious circle that that is established, so that if you don't have an address, you are in a legal situation, in an informal housing, then then you are, I mean, there are evictions, and then from the eviction, people have to find a new location, which is an informal one again. So it's really a vicious circle, I would say, that starts again. We found out also there are systematic barriers in many member states. The systematic rental market exclusion, which is not about, there is a no missing there, no ethnic, it's not about an ethnic profiling, but it's about fixing criteria that exclude, in a way, Roma from accessing from the rental market. So, for example, Roma applicants are significantly less likely to be invited to viewing that non-Roma with identical profiles. But if they start, for example, to ask for income requirements, to have permanent contracts proof and things like that, this is what is a kind. It's an exclusion, and where the discrimination comes from. Social housing, I think that a previous speaker also mentioned, is a big problem in the member states because the stock of social housing is quite limited. I think in Romania it was something like 2%, and in Bulgaria 3% of, no, not anymore. Okay, you will correct me. It is 1. Sorry, it was 1, even worse. So, so there are big waiting list, and then you know, Roma are not, I mean, top in the list, and then there are selection criteria as well, as I said before, and this has an effect on the inclusion, on the access to housing of Roma. Legal gaps, when we talk legal gaps, we see that there are barriers that concern the weak enforcement of anti-discrimination laws in some member states that are not helping this process of access to housing. Next slides, please. From the policy level, what we found also that around half of member states don't have Roma-specific housing policy. When we see, I mean, usually Roma are considered in these larger categories of vulnerable peoples, marginalized community. I mean, a definition that change constantly, but just to say that also from the funding side, European funding, these are rarely earmarked as funding for Roma housing. So also in what we found in some member states that also in implementing projects funding, for example, under these funds, there are delays in the implementation, and there is a poor monitoring, and we don't have really data that concern Roma and access of Roma to this project, to this housing, because simply, as I said before, there are not these data are not disaggregated. So we can't say how many Roma, when, and how. So the results of all this is the implementation of this framework under the objective housing remains fragmented, inconsistent, and often inadequate. So there is a need for a rights-based, integrated, and disaggregation-oriented approach. Next slides, please. Oh, sorry. We also have to mention some progress. So the progress are that there are targeted measures on housing in half of member states. There are efforts to simplify the access to social housing. There are, for example, in Czech Republic, there was a problem. There is now an housing supporting act. There are systemic transitions in some countries, for example, my country, Italy, they are reducing the segregated settlement population. They passed from 30,000 to 150,000. 30,000 to 15,000, sorry. And there are good practice that are put in place, like Housing First, that consist in offering first housing before, looking at other type of issues that people might have in entering the employment market or education. Next slides. So what needs to be done? We are still far from reaching Objective 2030, so we have to work still on segregation. When I say we, we're thinking about member states, because as a speaker said also before, implementation is mainly at national and local level, so prevention, segregation, forced eviction, work on structural barrier and the administrative hurdles for Roma. Political and social resistance is also coping with all these stereotypes, anti-gypsyism, that they are still very strong in the member states, and the projects are still limited in scale, so we should look for more long-term projects and have a better monitoring. Next slide. The speaker before spoke about other initiative and the Housing Action Plan. Yes, in the Housing Action Plan, there is, Affordable Housing Plan, sorry, there is an Action 10 which promotes housing solutions that protect and empower people in vulnerable situations, and Roma are included. I agree, it's only one word, but then we will have the 6th of May, together with the anti-poverty strategy, also this Council recommendation on fighting housing exclusion. And there we hope to find some more food for thoughts for Roma and for Roma situation in housing. The anti-poverty strategy also will come out on the May 6th and is embedding Roma equality objectives within future EU framework on poverty reduction, and will help us to foster systematic investment in income support and housing. Multi-annual financial framework program, we discussed in this event also yesterday about the importance to prepare national and regional partnership plans that consider specifically the need for desegregation, non-segregation for housing intervention in the member states. And the semester, of course, as Amanda said. Next. I think it's finished. Yes, just for your information, DG Just, which is DG where I come from, has launched a study on housing and discrimination. Discrimination considers broadly, in the sense not only for Roma, but for also for other forms of discrimination based on sex, age, and so on. And the study will be a good support in advancing the understanding of equality and non-discrimination in the housing sector. And as the previous speaker said, yes, affordable housing plan is just the first step. Maybe this study could help to feed even more further action after the affordable housing plan for the implementation. The study will come out in the first quarter of 2027. And with that, I've finished. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very, very much, Daniela, for this very comprehensive overview, first of all, of what are the frameworks out there, but also, unfortunately, the confirmation that what was noticed on the ground from these reports that we have reviewed earlier, and what you notice yourselves when reviewing the reports that member states send in about their own performance, pretty much echoes that not enough is being done. So with those sad realizations, going to the last but not least, the final speaker of this first panel of today, which is Daniela Aydin from the Council of Europe Development Bank, where you have been doing a lot of things to support member states who clearly member states need support. Clearly, more needs to be done, and a lot has been said about the money. It's all about the money. I'm not going to sing, but we know how the song goes. So what can you tell us about what resources are there available and what support is there for member states, also to the individual level, but more importantly to the systemic level, so that we can make some meaningful changes in what concerns Roma access to housing. And thank you again for being with us today and for sharing this with us. Please.
Does it work now? Yes.
Yeah, I think if I'm on, you're off. And
Okay.
Yeah, it's like a hot potato.
Yes, it seems to be working now. So thank you very much, Amana and Tuiergo, for inviting CEB, the Council of Europe Development Bank, today to this very important event. I wanted to start with a brief presentation of the Council of Europe Development Bank, to explain a bit about our mandate and some of the financial instruments that we have and we put at the disposal of the member states to advance inclusion of Roma communities in housing. So I will start with a very brief presentation of the bank. We are relatively small financial institution compared to other banks, so we are not always very known, but we are the oldest social bank of Europe. We've been established in 1956, and we are celebrating 70 years this year. We have 43 member states, so with Ukraine joined the last in 2023. We maintain a very strong institutional relationship with the Council of Europe, but we are financially and legally independent. So as you can see here on the map, the bank focuses on two categories of countries. First category is target group countries that you can see here in dark blue, and non-target countries. The target countries, we consider them as having very high investment needs. And these are usually countries in Eastern Europe and Western Balkans. And also here it happens that the largest Roma communities are also living. Regarding the target groups, I wanted to mention that there is a commitment from CEB to invest at least 50% of our own resources in the development of these target group countries. Yeah, if you could move to the next. Yeah, so here just a brief overview of some numbers. In 2025, CEB approved loans in the amount of 4.5 billion in 26 countries, and half of this investment went into target group countries. And also we approved grants in the amount of 4 million. Next. So with whom are we working? We work with a diverse array of borrowers, and these are the national governments, these are local authorities, as well as regional authorities, financial institutions, but also foundations and charities. So we take a very flexible approach in terms of the stakeholders that we work with. As you can see here, this is a snapshot from our strategy, and housing is a very important priority. CEB has a clear mandate to support member states in designing, implementing housing projects for the Roma communities. So we have a very strong mandate on that. Next. Yes, so here are the three priorities at the bank that we try to advance through our initiatives. This is housing and settlement upgrading, education, employment and skills, and financial inclusion. These are some of the priorities that the bank has experience in supporting the member states. But of course, we support any other initiatives that the member states are coming and they're asking funds for. So in terms of the financial instruments, speaking very concretely, the way we work with the member states is that when they approach CEB with a loan, we try to see where the development project is located, and we try to negotiate with the member state, especially if we're aware of the situation, to see whether they could include a component that's focusing specifically on Roma. So this is something that we are going through a process to see if the member state would commit to that. It can be, as I mentioned earlier, at the national level, but it could be a municipality because it's also an eligible borrower. So aside from loans, we also have dedicated investment. So we might have initiatives that focus specifically on Roma that are not part of the larger loan portfolio. And what we try to always do is to have blended operations. So we try to provide a package to the member states. We blend the loans with grant funding, and this could be in the form of technical assistance to design a specific project, to implement a specific feasibility study. And we also provide guarantees, technical assistance as mentioned, and this is from CEB's own trust funds, but we also manage quite a substantial EU resources through the WBIF, which is the Western Balkans Investment Framework, and the InvestEU, which some of you might know. So in terms of I wanted to refer back to my colleague about what is missing. I don't think funding is missing, just to confirm what has been said on this panel. I think political commitment is missing. We've had situations where there were evictions in some municipalities, and we've offered emergency support grants, and it was not accepted. So funds definitely are not an issue, and I think we can do as much, but we need very committed municipal authorities, regional authorities, national authorities to want to implement projects that advance access to housing for Roma communities. So just to give an example of how these financial instruments usually are built, for example, if a municipality is able to access cohesion funds, whether this is ESF Plus, ERDF, sometimes there is a requirement for co-financing. Or as part of the project, there might be ineligible costs that cannot be covered with EU funds. And this is the niche where the gap, where CEB can come in and cover the co-financing part that's usually required from the borrower side. Another modality of how we work with municipalities is that we are able to provide framework loans, and this is, for example, what we call a public facility framework, where we are able to cover with a loan up to 300 projects. So this really enables a municipality, for example, to implement quite a number of integrated solutions. So instead of coming to us with a loan to build a kindergarten, they can implement up to 300 projects at once with very good interest rates and with very long tenors, up to 30 years. And of course, we provide upstream project preparation support. So if a municipality needs resources to design a project that might take years just to prepare, we are able to provide grant resources as technical assistance for the municipality, sometimes with no condition to approach us for a follow-up loan. So I think that's very important. In terms of some examples, I tried to collect a few initiatives that were focused on advancing access to housing for Roma, and one of the most important is regional housing program that was implemented for a period of 10 years in the Western Balkans, where more than 100 families were able to access housing. Another project was the EU-funded housing and empowerment for Roma that had the risk mitigation mechanism for financial providers who provided microloans to the Roma families to build or renovate their houses. And we had a few projects in Hungary, Montenegro, Macedonia, Bulgaria, where countries applied for funds to renovate social housing. But for the last couple of years, we implemented a study, and we were talking about the social housing stock. Many countries in Eastern Europe invested close to zero in social housing. So the social housing stock is already very low. It's less than 1% in Bulgaria, if I'm not wrong. But for the last 10 years, there was zero investments. So this is, I think, quite telling of where social housing and affordable housing is. So that would be it. As I said, it's in our mandate. We are very committed to supporting member states to advance access to housing, but we need committed authorities. And commitment is usually lacking. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Daniela, because I think that a lot of people are actually unaware about the scale and the scope of support that is actually available. But it's also interesting how the policy side says it's about the money. The money side says the money is there, but the political will is not there. And somehow, somewhere, there is a blockage, which is why I'm also quite pleased that events like these ones manage to bring a hopefully grassroots side, policy side, and funding side at the table. We are woefully out of time, but I personally hate events where people are told there is no time for questions. So there is very, very, very limited time for questions. There is no time for comments.
No time for answers.
Sorry. So we have a maximum of 8 minutes for this exercise. I will take a few questions from the room, and answers will be on an I want to answer this basis. So I won't necessarily ask all of you to answer everything that's being asked, but if you feel that something sounds like something you might want to comment on, then I will ask the speakers in the panel to come in also very briefly. But first of all, I saw some hands. Let's start over here. Yes. So introduce yourselves when before commenting very briefly.
Gyuri Sümegi from Habitat for Humanity International. We are implementing Roma housing projects in several countries in Central and Eastern Europe. And I want to ask David about this Roma platform, housing Roma platform. What's the idea about, if you can elaborate a bit on that? Thank you.
Let me go ladies first, so and then Kostel.
Colleagues, do you hear me? Yes. Colleagues, Habitat and Commission and Council, do you have evaluation on sustainability? How many years after the projects were implemented that the results are still there, that the beautiful buildings that we see are still in the same state, and what are the follow-up measures, if any, were established? So what happens after 5, 10, 15 years? And the same on Iraq that you were mentioning, the example on Iraq, no, that I think it's still ongoing, no?
Very quick on the safeguarding. It's very well that there are so many initiatives going on housing, and housing get the right attention. But what I am concerned more is about the last year the Bridge organization published a report stating that over 1 billion euro has been spent on the Roma programs, and there are not overseas of what's happened with those money. So I experienced myself funds from the European Commission being spent by state authority to segregate Roma. I'm not saying that the same happens with the Council of Europe Bank, but tell us about the safeguarding. Sometimes such good intention could do harm. What safeguardings are you taking to make sure that the money that you spend on project and program are not harming the people that's supposed to help?
Anybody else? Quick fire questions. Delia, please.
Yeah, it's on. It's red. Now it's on. Yeah.
Just one comment, very short. It's better than a question because it's not requiring the answer. In my opinion, housing is about money, either loans or investment. It's a capitalistic word, no? So the only way to ensure for the Roma housing is to put it under the reparations issue, because slavery put Roma in a segregated outside of any settlement place in Romania, and other types of racism did the same. So in my opinion, we should think about it like that. It's only affirmative action, it's only compensation, reparation that will help us, nothing else. The rest is about money. Thank you.
Okay. I will now turn to the panel. Let's start again with the ladies. You got some questions on sustainability and on safeguarding, if you want to take those, and on the housing platform as well. You respond to what you feel.
Yes. I'll respond to the sustainability question. For specific projects, for example, I mentioned the regional housing program. That was a multi-donor initiative, and there are evaluations that will be carried out even after the implementation, that's for sure. So I think those evaluations will be public. We also had projects from Romania, for example. Now I'm diverting to the question about segregation and doing more harm than good. Where we just didn't pursue because we did not see that the government or the municipality here did not take enough measures to prove that the social housing that they were intending to build will take a desegregation approach, and we did not pursue the project. So we are trying to be very deliberate and intentional about this. Sometimes we take consultants from the country who are able to assess these type of requests that the bank is receiving.
On this side, would you like to comment on any of the questions that we heard about how do we evaluate sustainability? I think the safeguarding was answered. And then on the affordable housing platform, which is this new
Roma housing platform, what David was.
Okay. What we're seeing is the need for a Roma housing platform. I think to do any urban development well in an inclusive way, it requires joining the dots. There's a need for empowered communities. There's a need for civil society to help make the linkage between the communities and the local government. We need willing local governments, political will. We need the service providers, the water providers, the education, everybody else working, which means line ministries quite often, and then it needs national government and all the actors kind of working together, but also technical know-how. How do you fast track land tenure? You can use social tenure domain model, for instance. There's how do you do a special planning zone, and how do you create that within the legislation? So there's a lot of know-how that is not often there. So you might have a mayor who is politically ready to do this, a Roma community that's ready to work with a local mayor, but then do they know the options that are available to them on the technical level? So the platform tries to bring together knowledge, good practices, but also a way of having mayors communicate with each other, having different stakeholders communicating with each other, learning as we're doing, but ultimately looking at scale rather than a project-by-project approach. How do you then look at city-wide initiatives? How do you move the bar? And finally, financial pathways. How do you blend finance? How do you link with CEB? How do you link with these things? How do you leverage land value? How do you leverage buildings and things like this, disused buildings or underutilized buildings? It tries to just bring the whole thing together and make settlement approaches and citywide settlement approaches much more accessible and much more normal.
Okay, on that note, and echoing Delia's wise words, which is that housing is first and foremost a matter of justice and of access to justice and of access to reparatory justice. We are not closing this event. We are moving to a panel that is at least as exciting as this one, which is our second panel. But let me, first of all, thank the distinguished members of this panel, Matthew Baldwin, who had to leave, but also David Aubrey from the UN Habitat, Florin Botonogu from the Policy Center on Roma and Minorities, Daniela Mormile from DG Just, and Daniela Aydin from the Council of Europe Development Bank for this session. They will stay with us till the end of this event, I hope. I'm looking at them, so you can also grab them informally if you want. Let's give them a round of applause while I busy myself with nameplates. And may I invite the second panel.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are already set up for the next session on Roma communities and energy poverty, which is an rarely see on the agenda so far, but we hope that it will be connected. I'm Anna Bayomi. I work as Energy Poverty Policy Officer at FEANTE, the Federation of Homeless Service Providers, and our small team of two, we are working together to for a socially fair energy transition that truly delivers for the most vulnerable. But today, and in the last years, we are seeing growing inequalities in this transition, which is becoming increasingly technological, with a strong focus on electrification of transport, electric cars, and heat pumps and smart meters, and all these things that are very important for the transition, but are very far from being accessible for those that are living in the worst housing conditions. For example, under leaking roofs, or in such issues that we've seen already in the previous presentations. And why prioritizing vulnerable groups with energy efficiency and funding is required by EU law. It often fails to reach those who need it most, and instead it frequently supports those who are already better off, spending public money on those who could afford by their own means or with private funding the renovations. And during my high school and university years, I had the opportunity to spend time in northeast Hungary, in the area of Cserehat, which is a very beautiful part of Hungary, but also very poor, with charming little villages. And if you go to the next slide, you can see that sometimes at the end of these villages, we have the Roma settlements. It's not only at the edge of the village, but it's often after the end of the gas and utility network. And so this map is the map of the village of Lok, where this settlement was built during the 60s under the so-called Cseh lakás program, which means csökkentett értékű lakások, reduced value homes. They rebuilt huts, which were before in that area, and they replaced literally at the same place at the end of the village, with homes that didn't have running water, sewage, gas or district heating, so they are still heating with solid fuels, and the network sometimes was expanded, but in some places it's still missing. So basically they put a solid roof over these families' head with a kitchen and one room with families with many children, but they did no other measures. And I just read an article about how inaccessible was this program sometimes, because of the eligibility criteria requiring, if you go to the next slide, so these are the homes from a more closer perspective. And if you go to the next slide, even more one. So these were the eligibility criteria, like 2 years of consistent employment, living in the settlement, which was under the defined typology, and also they had to have a minimum wage and contributing with 10% of the development cost, and also owning a plot of land, which, if we imagine the people living in huts, it's maybe not the criteria that we imagine as being accessible. And 60 years later, with the rural housing program targeted to the renovation of homes in rural settlements, not segregated Roma settlements, but rural villages, in the last 5-6 years, they offered 100% non-refundable support, grant support, but with criteria that excluded again those who would need it most, because they required post-financing, strict eligibility criteria regarding 2 years of employment and a set of a number of children below a certain age, and other restrictive criteria, and demanding a very complex administrative work from households that were maybe not very well educated or are struggling constantly with the daily issues around poverty. And if you go to the next slide, the local Habitat Office in Hungary realized how unfair are these conditions and how unfortunate it is that the grants that are supposed to target the worst housing conditions are not reaching these households. So in cooperation with Erste Bank, they set up a support scheme where they pre-financed the renovation work, and they also provided administrative and technical support in order to make accessible the very complex renovation procedure for these households. So there are good examples, but if we want that proper housing conditions are accessible for everyone, we cannot depend on one NGO offering solutions for maybe 100 households in a few years. So if we go to the next slide, from the EU level, we are constantly trying to advocate at an EU level to ensure that the social and green policies are mainstreamed. From the Roma perspective, we don't see that the Roma perspective is appearing in any of the energy-related transition, the energy transition-related policy files, but also social mainstreaming is not always happening. Also, an issue that I shortly mentioned already, solid fuel heating, which is really prevalent in Roma housing, is not recognized at all as an issue in the energy departments of the EU. And furthermore, the EU law that requires prioritization of vulnerable groups with energy efficiency measures and funding, it is not translated into the EU budget and the practices around, like the national distributional practices. And also, we don't see many financing programs that are aligned with the needs of those that are living in the worst homes, including the Roma settlements. And we also do not see the earmarking that is necessary. But now I would like to give the floor to the two representatives of the Lightbringers Foundations that work in Hungary to offer the benefit of the green transition in forms of solar panels installed in the roofs of segregated Roma villages. That is, they will tell more on how they make this accessible. So I will I will give the floor to Mihály Orsos first, who is the co-founder of the Lightbringers Foundation, and he's also a data scientist with a background in finance and analytics, and teaches at the Central European University Roma program. And then Károly Búza will also talk about the work of the foundation and some gaps in the larger policy areas. And Károly is the president of the foundation, and he also works as a social worker and writing his PhD thesis on mental health of young people with a focus on self-harm and suicide. And we were promised to have translation, but it was not delivered, unfortunately. So I will try to do my best to translate Károly's speech in order to make it accessible to everyone.
Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Mihály Orsos, and as I mentioned, I'm a data scientist, and I also work as an instructor and teaching AI and programming. And I studied physics, and I think it's important because let me tell you the story what happened with how this Lightbringers Foundation was just liked. So in 2014, I was part of the Roma Versitas Foundation. In your country, do you have a Roma Versitas Foundation? Just hands up if you have. Yeah? All right, so, and at that time, the director was Gábor, who is sitting here, had a crazy idea that he wanted to do some green academy. He wanted to bring probably we were like to drink some beer, so we started to build a beer collector. So it's basically having, I'm going to show it in a video. So we had the beer collector and the solar panel. So the main idea was that we need to somehow try to use the green energies in the areas where it's not accessible. And we had a camp at Nagyecsed, which is, it's a really small city. And please go to the next slide. So actually the slides are available on the internet on my website. If you are interested, then definitely I can share that. So go to the next one, please. That was the camp, and I think it's around 5 minutes video. I would like to spend 1 minute each of them. I will have 4 videos, but please start it and just try to just go around, and it's going to be 1 minute. So here the main idea was that we tried to build a solar grill, use the sun, and make an oven basically. That was one project. The other one was a beer collector, and the third one was So this is how it started. And the main idea was that Gábor told me that disassemble it and put a switch on that. And then we are going to put in a place where there is no electricity. So you can just go, thanks. And at the end, just go back to the videos and please show the end of that. So can you, can you make the video a bit quieter? The video? No. Okay. So basically that was the end of it. Thanks. So the main idea was that we had these solar panels. I have to connect them, and we put it into this house where there was no electricity, and they used the candles to have some light at night, and the children had to write the homework with the candle. So that was the first prototype. And after I went home, and I was started to think that how can we make it bigger? And then we figured out actually the system And I'm going to show the system, how does it work. Yeah, so thanks. Please go to the next one. So that was the first ever, and that's the beer collector that we just did. Yeah, I think it's not that important. I'm going to share the videos if any of you are interested. Yeah, go to the next one. And that was the actual first installation in 2014 in October. Yeah, start it please. And it actually is in English. And yeah, that was really nice. It was called in Bog. And it's gonna be in English. Yeah, so you can see it's a bigger solar panel. We had a battery, and we were using light strips. Yeah, so that was the founder, the donator. Yeah, just show the end of it. Yeah, so as you can see, we put it on the house, the solar panel, and then there was a controller. That's the solar panel there, a really small one. We had a small controller, and then a battery and some light strips. So this is what we did. We ordered the light strips from China. It was extremely cheap, and everything was quite cheap. And of course, it was quite interesting that it was working. There was no electricity there, no lights. And after a few hours, we had electricity in that house. And please go to the next one. But of course, we can't go everywhere to just put, so we have to scale. And the next idea, the next step of the foundation was that we transferred the knowledge. So now we just went to a city where we actually got a lot of solar panels, and we could share the knowledge how they can set up the system. And just go to the next one, please. Next slide. And how does it work? We have a charge controller, a solar panel, a battery, and a LED strip. And if you connect all of it, you can have basically a lighting system in any places where there is no electricity. Yes, so that's the birth of the Lightbringers Foundation. That's all I wanted to share with you. Thanks a lot. Yeah. Thanks. We can go further.
Jó, oké. Mindenkit én is üdvözlök, de hát egyértelmű, jó így.
Welcome everybody.
Angol nyelvtudásom az 17 óta nem fejlődött semmit.
I couldn't practice English since almost 10 years, so apologies.
De igyekszem.
But I will try.
Az elmúlt időszakban, tehát most hallottuk, hogy igazából a lakásproblémákkal tehát milyen nagy probléma van a romaságnál.
We just heard the extent of the housing problems among Roma people.
De keveset hallottunk az energiaszegénységről és az áramszegénységről, amely hozzátartozik.
But we didn't hear much about energy poverty and electricity poverty, which is part of the problem.
Hozzátartozik ez is, hisz nagyon sokan kerülnek ez miatt nagyon nagy bajban.
But it is part of the big issues that Roma people face, because these are the issues that often lead to more serious complications.
2017-es adatokat mondok majd.
I will tell data from 2017.
Magyarországon 200 000 gyerek érintett az energia és az áramszegénységben.
200,000 children are impacted by energy and electricity poverty in 2017.
majdnem, tehát több mint 100 000 lakásban van energia és áramfeltöltős óra.
And over 100,000 units, we have prepayment meters.
1 millió embernek van energiatartozása, számlatartozása.
And around 1 million people have arrears in their utility bills, 10% of the population.
Ez a szomorú, hogy ezek az adatok ezek azóta 17 óta nem változtak, sőt romlottak.
The data is not very valuable, but most likely the situation has worsened since.
Nagyon fontos, ha áram nincs, a fényhozók ezt képviseli, ha áram nincs, nincs semmi.
And the light bringers represent that if we have no electricity, there is nothing.
És ez nagyon sok, nincs tévé, nincsen mosógép,
There is no television, like all the basic things that we imagine, it's not present.
Nálunk a Covid időszak bemutatta ezt, hogy mekkora probléma, tehát ilyen globális problémák mekkora problémát okozhatnak, ha nincs energia, ha nincs áram.
And the Covid showed how the problems are becoming complex when a crisis happens.
A feltöltő energia, tehát a feltöltős órákra például nem vonatkozott a moratórium.
For example, the moratorium for utility cuts was not in place for the prepayment meters.
És ez azt jelentette, hogy a családok valóban áram nélkül maradtak a legnehezebb időszakban.
And that resulted in that all the families with prepayment meters remained without electricity in the most difficult period.
Mivel nem tudták föltölteni.
Because they couldn't top up their meters.
Ezek a problémák, ezek azóta is jelen vannak, és nem történt átütő változás.
And these issues are still present, but there was no real change.
2021-ben tartottunk egy Európa Bizottságos megbeszélést, ahol a 21-es és a 27-es stratégiát próbáltuk összehozni civilekkel.
They had a meeting with the European Commission in 2021 when they tried to plan the next strategic framework.
Bár ahhoz hozzátartozik a politikai és társadalmi problémák, amelyek most oldódnak meg idézőjelben.
And to that we also had important political and social issues that maybe now there will be a change.
Legalábbis bízunk benne, hogy nagy változások lesznek. Ezen kéne változni, tehát ebben kérnénk a segítséget az EU-tól.
This needs to be changed, and we are asking for help from the European Union in this.
Mert ez nem csak Magyarországon probléma, hanem Európában probléma. Milyen hátrányos helyzetű embereknek és a romáknak a fő problémája.
And it's not only an issue in Hungary, but it's an issue all over Europe, especially for Roma communities.
Hisz ha áram nincs, akkor semmi sincs, igazából energia, hisz az oktatáshoz, a fejlődéshez, a munkához való hozzájutáshoz, mindenhez szükség van.
Because if we don't have electricity, we don't have anything, and electricity is necessary for everything, for studies, employment, or any other areas of life.
És ez miatt a hátrányos helyzetű emberek például az otthoni háztartási eszközeik is nagyon el vannak avulva, illetve életveszélyes a lakásban lévő elektromos berendezés, illetve vezetékek.
And another issue is that electric safety, because appliances are really old, but also the wires, and they represent constant threat to health and even life.
Hisz semmilyen európai pályázat, illetve semmilyen olyan pénz nem jön ezekhez a családokhoz, amely ezen tudnának esetleg változtatni.
Because there is no EU and national funding arriving to these families that would help them to tackle these specific problems.
Miközben a többi társadalmi rétegnek jönnek ilyen támogatások, napelemtelepítés és egyéb dolgok.
While other parts of society benefit from support for solar panels and other electrification funds.
Ezen kéne változtatni.
And this needs to be changed.
Mert ha így tovább haladunk, akkor még nagyobb lesz a hátrány, még nagyobb lesz a szakadék.
Because if we continue like this, the gap will be bigger and bigger, and it will be a larger problem.
Igazán köszönöm.
Thank you very much. We can have quick questions or clarifications. I don't know if there are any. And if not, then I would pass for the final words the floor to Amana.
Thank you very much. I'd invite you to stay here for this last session, which we have with Mrs. Ivona Batali, who I'm going to invite to join me here at the podium. And I'm also going to formally put your name here. Oops. That should. Try the other way. The people who created it. Ok, acum iau bine. Vă mulțumesc. Poftiți, vă rog. Și permiteți-mi să vă urmez o pungă cu amintiri. Okay, so now the panel is complete. First of all, I want to thank very much FEANSA and the Lightbringers Foundation to have brought some light also to today's event, and also to bring these kinds of examples, these kinds of solutions that actually work. The difference is that, of course, when bright people come together, sparks fly, and I'm not just talking about energy, sparks fly and solutions are found, but those solutions need scaling. There is a wealth of good ideas on the ground. There are many NGOs who do amazing things, but how can we convert those things into systemic solutions that get applied on a broader scale, so that individuals and civil society don't have to keep coming up with patches to the systemic solutions that are left behind because of insufficient provision and of inequality, particularly in access. But these are exactly the kinds of ideas that we want to showcase and bring to the forefront. And I was delighted when Anna approached me and said, would we have a space to actually present this good practice? And we were very happy that we were able to offer it to them today and to host them here today. And once again, apologies for the lack of interpretation, which was supposed to be happening. But thank you, Anna, also for performing this additional service. And thank you again for bringing these realities here. And don't worry that if you see some empty chairs, there are people who are still following us online. And also the recording of this will also be available afterwards. And we're happy to share also the presentations and the videos. So for our closing session, we also have two speakers, one who is here in person and the other one who will try to make it in person. But if they don't make it in person, we have a video of theirs. I'm talking about Benedetta Scuderi, who is a member of the European Parliament. But before we turn to her, because I suggest that we take that video at the end and we also give her some more time to maybe arrive here. I am absolutely delighted to have here with us Ms. Ivona Batali from the Romanian government. She is joining us from the Ministry on Projects and EU Funds, which investments. Investments and European projects, but basically this is what it means. It means that this is the ministry who is also overseeing what the Romanian government is doing with European funds. But also, very importantly, Mrs. Batali is the Romanian national Roma contact point. As you know, every government has a national contact point put there in order to oversee Roma inclusion and to make sure that this is mainstreamed in all files of the respective government. And this is obviously a very important role because it ensures that it keeps Roma issues high on the agenda. Mrs. Batali, you were here from the beginning, which is rare for decision makers to stay for so long. So we are very privileged that you were able to take part from the beginning. So you've heard everything that everybody has said. So we are now eager to hear your reflections and what are your views on how can we move the needle on these housing and energy issues. Thank you very much for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much once again, and I thank you for the invitation and for this discussion, which is definitely important and necessary. And, after all these interventions, very important ones, there is only one conclusion, that, in many communities, in many Roma communities across Europe, the access to housing and the access to energy is not a technical word. It is a day-to-day reality. And I would like also to tell you a few things about the Romania situation. I'm the General Director for Communication and International Relations, but also the department that I'm running hosts, so to speak, the National Roma Counterpoint. In the same time, I have to mention that Romania is the only European state that has also a National Roma Counterpoint and also a National Roma Agency, which is not under our coordination. It is under the coordination of the government. But definitely we have a good relationship with them because, otherwise that cannot be. And anyway, due to the fact that on the Roma issue we have an enabling condition, a thematic enabling condition we are sharing with them. And that enabling condition, for the period 2021-2027 is related to a strategic framework regarding the measures that accelerates the Roma inclusion with accent on elimination of the segregation, establishment of the basic values. It has, of course, targets. It has intermediary objectives. It also has mechanism of evaluation and implementation, and definitely this condition is related to everything at the not necessarily national, but also regional and local, and. We emphasize, and also the enabling condition emphasizes the necessity and the need and the obligation to keep the contact with civil society and with other relevant actors. But that is for the 2021-2027, because we definitely know that the discussion for the new period, financing period 2028-2034 the discussion have started, and for us, for us is very important, and our ministry pushes very much for this Roma issue to be included in the new architecture. Right. And yes, because, we need clearer, simpler ways to finance whatever the needs the local Roma communities have. Well, and I will tell you that also for this programming period we have different financing sources. But the financing sources do not represent a problem, and the absorption does not represent a problem. The problem is the target that we envisage. We have two programs which are under the coordination of our ministry. It is the program related to employment, and also the program related to the social inclusion and dignity. And they envisage the help for the vulnerable communities, including the Roma. Also, we have the national climate, the social climate fund, and in Romania we have launched a public consultation for the social climate national plan, and we have allocated an amount of 6 billion euro for the period 2026-2032. And also we have the modernization fund, and the modernization fund is it's related to whatever it was discussed today, meaning the financing for energy efficiency, networks, and different measures for the households in poverty. But also I would like to mention I would like to mention also that in our country, I also mentioned the National Roma Agency, our National Roma Contact Point, the enabling condition, and also the fact that there is a strategy, a national strategy for the inclusion of the Roma for the period 2022-2027 that comprises measures related also to housing for the vulnerable communities, for the Roma vulnerable communities, and also that includes the access to utilities, and it includes a very important thing which is represented by the integrated interventions. And of course, in parallel, we have the national housing strategy for the period 2022-2050, which is a part of the RRF, Resilience and Recovery Fund, and which envisages the building of 40,000 social housing up to 2050. So I would like to tell you that as well. And as a National Roma Contact Point, our aim is to link the national strategy to the EU strategic framework, and also to keep the contact with the European Commission, with the Council of Europe, and our role is also to include the Roma in everything related to funding. I mean, we tried, and we talked to our colleague from the managing authorities to send in the public debate, or to organize specialized public debates with the Roma civil society, especially when we have the calls that targets the Roma community. And related to the European initiatives that were discussed today, that were presented today, the Romania aims to value the new European initiatives so that they might have very concrete results for the vulnerable Roma communities. Related to the housing, European Affordable Housing Plan opens an opportunity to link the accessible housing to desegregation, to combat the exclusion, the housing exclusion, and to have public interventions, public and social interventions which are better aimed. In terms of energy, Affordable Energy Action Plan gives a framework for reducing the energetic costs and for measures to protect the vulnerable households. I also mentioned the future social climate national plan. And by this, Romania may finance structural measures for those households which are affected by the energetic poverty. Well, what else can I tell you is that, a message, and a conclusion is very simple to take, because, we cannot have a Europe of accessible housing and accessible energy if the Roma population is left aside. We cannot have. And Romania is willing to contribute to this European agenda by institutional coordination, by the use of European funds, and by promoting integrated interventions based on data collection, based on local partnership, and based on the real participation of the communities. And like this, we may step from intention to impact. Thank you.
On those words, thank you very much, Mrs. Batali. I heard some very encouraging things about investment in social housing, which was also mentioned copiously since the beginning of this event, but also we very much like to hear that your government is trying to involve Roma in all matters regarding funding, because of course right now the multi-annual financial framework is being discussed and decided, and it is of key importance because action is where the money and political will meet. But also very encouraging to hear what you said about desegregation, which continues to be one of the key objectives when we talk about Roma access to housing. So the last speaker of today is Benedetta Scuderi, member of the European Parliament, also from the Greens family, who, when you organize events, you chase a lot of high-level speakers and beg them to come and speak to your event. And Benedetta Scuderi approached us and said, I would really love to speak in the housing event because this is a topic that is close to my heart. So obviously we were absolutely delighted. Then unfortunately, because of some scheduling issues, she said, I'm going to do everything I can to be there in person, but if I'm not in person there, here is a video message from me. And we are going to play that now. From her side, but just know that she is, as you will hear in her own voice, somebody who is incredibly committed and who is willing in a European Parliament where there are no Roma MEPs to carry the voice of Roma, at least insofar as access to housing and energy is concerned. So let's hear it from herself.
Good afternoon, everyone. I must apologize for not being able to be with you in person today. But I wanted to make sure my contribution reached you on this wonderful occasion. It is so good to know that in these days the EU institutions are filled with your presence. This is our home. And yet, it is also deeply frustrating to realize how much work still needs to be done to fight the structural exclusion of Roma communities from the welfare and service system of our member states. Since the mid-90s, progress has certainly been made, but not enough. And the challenges we face today are larger and more complex than ever, leading too many people to treat the inclusion of marginalized communities as a second-order issue. Instead, I believe that it is, on the contrary, a matter of human dignity. And it is more important than ever in these times of crisis not to forget that politics must serve the well-being of all people. Dear friends, one of the greatest challenges we face today is how to build a Europe that works for all, not just a few. Access to education, employment, housing, energy as a basic human right has become more and more difficult, exacerbating social exclusion and polarization in our societies. The EU Roma strategic framework sets out a number of targets to be achieved by 2030. Member states have more or less transposed the framework into national Roma strategies and action plans, but implementation is uneven and under-financed, leading to persistent policy reality gaps. The Commission upcoming third implementation report will provide the most complete available snapshot of progress towards the 2030 targets by mid-2026. But the 2024 Roma survey and made by FRA and other related civil monitoring reports show only marginal to moderate progress in closing gaps between Roma and the general population, particularly on poverty, discrimination, health, and housing. The goal to reduce the housing deprivation gap by at least one-third is deemed unlikely to be achieved EU-wide, with Roma communities still being disproportionately exposed to poor housing, overcrowding, and limited access to water and basic services. This is precisely what the European Parliament resolution on the housing crisis in the European Union, adopted in March, should have acknowledged. In that resolution, the word Roma appears only in the preamble, a purely formal acknowledgement in a document that should set clear political directions and offer solutions, but which in fact ignores a large segment of the population. The data show that more than half of the Roma population lives in dilapidated housing, in damp and dark homes, or in dwellings lacking adequate sanitation facilities. Roma women face a greater risk of social exclusion and marginalization, and unfortunately, many Roma people experience de facto homelessness. This logic is surreal. The Roma are Europe's largest ethnic minority. 6 million lives in Europe, 6 million people from the Roma community live in the European Union. It means that there are millions of young people, women, families, older adults, and homeless individuals, members of the Roma community, who face the same challenges as everyone else, yet see their basic rights under-recognized. The energy crisis and the subsequent raging energy poverty makes matters even worse. Across Europe, as with millions of other Europeans, millions of Roma face the dual challenge of high energy costs and substandard housing. Rising prices are forcing them to make impossible choices between heating and food, exacerbating the struggles of those already living in the most difficult conditions. Outdated infrastructure and inadequate insulation are forcing people to live in energy-inefficient homes, driving up their utility bills and leaving them cold and in uncomfortable conditions. Solution exists. Efficient renovation, heat pumps, rooftop solar panels and community energy projects should ease this burden and should be directed especially to communities that are most vulnerable, like the Roma community. However, since the initial costs are often too high for families in need, public subsidies and grants are essential. It is also crucial to ensure that these services actually reach Roma communities by making it easier for them to access these grants. In this context, all we can do is to continue to work to ensure equal access for Roma to adequate housing. First of all, we need to do it in the negotiations around the Affordable Housing Plan, the Affordable Energy Action Plan, and National Building, Renovation and Social Climate Plans. That means directing EU funds where they are needed the most, enforcing anti-discrimination safeguards, and never allowing Roma neighborhoods to be left behind in the name of technical feasibility or fiscal prudence. Your effort and advocacy helps us at the EU level to hold public authorities accountable for promises they have made but too often failed to deliver. Real inclusion is not about being seen once a year. It's about having a seat at the table when the rules, the budgets, and the plans are made. Roma successes are never the work of a single person, but the expression of the strength of many communities cooperating together, and we can only learn from this. Not only about housing and energy, but about resilience, about solidarity, and about what it means to build a Europe that serves all its people, not just the most powerful ones. If we keep this fight alive together, we will not only change statistics, we will change societies. Thank you so much, and I hope we can meet in person very soon.
I think that deserves a round of applause, even if she wasn't in the room, because that was incredible passion to hear from the European Parliament. And if only all MEPs were as committed as her. I'm only going to take another 90-second stop of your time to wrap up this event. I'm first going to start with the housekeeping to make sure that everybody hears that. So we were here today during the entire day, courtesy of the European Economic and Social Committee, who also has a permanent group on the inclusion of Roma, and who is happy to host us one day of the Roma Week every single year, and we were very grateful to be able to count on their support this year as well. I want to also thank the partners of this event, specifically UN Habitat and FEANZA. Thank you for the great collaboration and for pulling this together. I thought, from my moderator perspective, I thought the quality of the interventions was outstanding. I want to remind all participants that there are sheets of paper with QR codes where you can download our publications, that all the materials will also be shared with you electronically. And last but not least, that there will be a dinner starting in just about half an hour at Camilou restaurant on Rue Joseph II, number 27, where you are also all invited. So the day is not over, just the boring part of the day. But to conclude the boring part of the day, which was also what we are here to do, which is discuss how to actually bring change on the ground. What came through and through in everybody's intervention was the role that anti-gypsyism plays in shaping Roma access to housing and to energy, and how this results in pretty much everything we see. It results in forced evictions, which condemn people to homelessness. It results in informal settlements where people are still condemned to homelessness because those settlements are not settlements and those houses are not houses, not by any stretch of definitions. So that is still housing exclusion, and that is still pushing people to the margins, and that is still homelessness according to the ethos definition developed by FANSA here, where homelessness is not just sleeping rough, it's sleeping in unsafe, unsuitable conditions, where whether it is overcrowdedness, whether it is you fear for your safety, or whether it is that you fear eviction very soon. Segregation is a direct consequence of anti-gypsyism, keeping people separately, keeping undesirable people away from desirable properties. And this is a reality that continues to be perpetuating, which is why commitments such as those that we heard to curb this are ever so welcome. We also heard from decision makers that the political will is there, and we also heard from the money people that the money is there. So hopefully 1 year from now we will not meet again to say nothing has changed. I see skeptical faces in the room. I mirror those faces. I know that. But at least we were made some promises today, and we heard a lot of first ever for the EU. First ever social climate plans, first ever affordable energy plan, first ever affordable housing plan, first ever EU anti-poverty strategy coming out also in a couple of weeks. So let's see if all of these first ever end up delivering where it truly makes a difference, which is in Roma communities. But if we learned anything today, is that no matter how dark the darkness, there are always light bringers. And let's all go and try to be light bringers wherever we go and whatever we do. Thank you very much for standing up for Roma rights today and every day. Opre Roma, and have a nice rest of the day. Thank you very much.